In the last 72 hours, Siminalayi Fubara has done something that no Rivers State governor has ever survived doing, and he has done it twice. He did not fight Wike in the press, he did not fight Tinubu at a rally, he outmaneuvered both of them inside the one institution they thought they controlled completely, the Rivers State House of Assembly. One document, signed quietly, filed without a press conference, has effectively made Fubara the most dangerous man in South Nigeria right now. Everyone is talking about whether Fubara will survive Wike's pressure, but nobody is asking the more important question: what happens to APC's 2027 structure in South if Fubara does not just survive, but wins? The surface story is a political feud between a governor and his godfather. The real story is a constitutional crisis inside one of Nigeria's most oil-rich states, with national implications nobody in Abuja is publicly admitting. So here is what I need you to stay for, because in the next 30 minutes, I am going to show you exactly what move Fubara made, who it has permanently weakened, and why Tinubu's political team in Abuja is far more worried about this than they are letting on publicly. You need to see this. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. This channel exists because I spend hours, sometimes entire nights, going through court documents, assembly records, budget lines, and sources that mainstream Nigerian media will never touch so that you do not have to. I do this for one reason: because informed Nigerians change Nigeria. If you are new here, hit subscribe right now. It costs you nothing, but it tells me that this work matters, and right now, that means everything to me. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you in the next 30 minutes will completely change how you read Nigerian politics. Fubara's relationship with Wike collapsed publicly when the Rivers State House of Assembly, loyalists to Wike, attempted to impeach him using a constitutionally questionable process that legal analysts have flagged as a potential violation of Section 188 of the 1999 Constitution, as amended. Rather than negotiate or retreat, Fubara made an unexpected countermove. He backed a rival assembly faction and used executive power to effectively create a parallel legitimacy structure. Specific detail to source and verify: the Executive Gazette or administrative order that recognized the pro-Fubara assembly faction as the legitimate legislative body. Timing is critical. This escalation comes in the build-up period before 2027 INEC ward and local government registration exercises, meaning control of Rivers State's political structure now is not just symbolic, it determines who controls delegates. Wike's own rise used the same playbook against Rotimi Amaechi from 2013 to 2015. He cultivated an alternative power base inside the PDP structure while publicly maintaining loyalty. Fubara appears to have studied that pattern closely. The Obasanjo-Atiku split of 2006 is the most relevant federal precedent: a sitting president and vice president openly at war, with each building parallel institutions to claim legitimacy. The lesson from 2006 is the person who controls the physical institution, the building, the gazette, the formal instrument, tends to outlast the person who controls the media narrative. Reference Tinubu's own experience with Lagos governorship succession politics as context for how he views state-level loyalty. It is transactional, not ideological. Here is the number most people do not know. As of the last publicly available FAAC allocation data, Rivers State received over 650 billion naira in federal transfers in a single recent fiscal year, making it the third highest allocation recipient in Nigeria. That is not background information. That is the reason this fight is happening. Nobody goes to war over a governorship. They go to war over who controls the disbursement of 650 billion naira a year. But here is what nobody is telling you yet, and it starts with the one institution that Fubara has quietly repositioned himself to control that Wike assumed he never could. Rivers State House of Assembly, the central battleground. The constitutional question is whether a faction of members can constitute a quorum under Section 95 of the 1999 Constitution, which requires a simple majority. Both factions claim legitimacy. This ambiguity is deliberate, and who benefits from it is the key analytical question. The Federal High Court and Rivers State High Court, multiple suits filed by both sides, track the case numbers. Court orders have been obtained, ignored, and counter-petitioned. The judiciary is now a tactical instrument for both camps, not a neutral arbiter. The DSS reported involvement in monitoring political actors in Rivers State. Wike, as FCT minister with proximity to the presidency, allegedly has a relationship with security apparatus deployment. This is alleged based on media reports, verified with specific incidents. INEC, quiet but critical actor. The timing of any state of emergency declaration or assembly crisis affects INEC's ability to conduct local government elections in Rivers State, which in turn determines delegate counts for 2027 presidential primaries.
Section 188 of the 1999 Constitution sets out the impeachment process, requires a two-thirds majority and a 7-day notice. Any attempt that does not meet this threshold is constitutionally void on its face, but the political reality is that Nigerian courts have historically been slow to enforce this, giving the side that moves first a tactical window. Section 11 of the Constitution on state of emergency. The President can declare a state of emergency in a state, but requires a two-thirds vote of the National Assembly. The question being asked in political circles, not yet publicly, is whether Tinubu would consider this option and whether he has the NAS votes to execute it. The legal gray area that benefits Wike. Because the court system is slow and because the executive and assembly are simultaneously in conflict, there is a constitutional vacuum where neither side can be definitively declared illegitimate fast enough to matter politically. Wike's team understands this and is using it. Hold that thought about who benefits from this legal gray area, because in a few minutes I am going to show you exactly which political actor has been quietly positioned to exploit this vacuum, and the answer is not the person you are currently thinking of. Siminalayi Fubara. If he stabilizes the assembly crisis, he becomes the first governor in Rivers State history to defeat a Wike-backed opposition from within his own party structure. That makes him a nationally significant figure, not just a state-level actor. His leverage in 2027 presidential negotiations increases substantially. Peter Obi and Labour Party. Every day APC is consumed by internal war in Rivers State is a day LB can organize without resistance in the South-South. Rivers State was LB's second strongest state in 2023. If APC structure fractures, LB's ceiling in 2027 rises. Opposition PDP, specifically Atuku's faction, which has contacts with Wike despite the 2023 fallout. A weakened Wike at FTC reduces his national bargaining power, which reduces Atuku's access to his network. Wike, his political brand is built entirely on the perception that he is undefeatable in Rivers State. If Fubara survives and consolidates, that brand is permanently damaged. A weakened Wike at FTC is a Wike who cannot deliver federal infrastructure promises to allies, which reduces his value to Tinubu. Tinubu's South-South political architecture. The president bet on Wike as his anchor in Rivers. If Wike cannot control Rivers, Tinubu has no reliable base in the South-South entering 2027. That is not a minor political inconvenience, it is a structural electoral problem. State allocation control. Whoever controls the recognized executive and assembly also controls the state's budget approval process. A Fubara-aligned assembly means his capital expenditure allocations, contractor appointments, and security votes are approved without obstruction. LGHM and elections. Local government elections in Rivers will determine who controls ward-level structures. These structures are the machinery for delegate manipulation in party primaries. The fight over the assembly is at its core a fight over who wins the LGA elections. Federal contracts flowing through FTC. Wike's leverage has always been that his FTC position controls major federal infrastructure contracts. Contractors who work in Rivers State need both state and federal goodwill, which is precisely why some business interests are quietly hedging by maintaining relationships with both sides. Rivers has approximately 3.6 million registered voters. In 2023, it delivered a split result between APC, LP, and PDP that no single party dominated. Whoever consolidates Rivers in 2027 at the level of party structure, not just votes, gains a significant delegate and polling unit advantage.
The APC National Working Committee's silence on the rivers crisis is itself a signal. They have not publicly backed Wike's faction or Fubara's faction. That silence means negotiations are ongoing at a level above what is publicly visible. I know what some of you are thinking right now. This is just another Nigerian political fight between two powerful men. It will be settled in Abuja over rice and palm wine, the way they always are. But look at what happened in 2013 when Wike moved against Amaechi using the same assembly tactics. That conflict did not resolve quietly. It produced a full party defection, a Supreme Court case, and the political realignment that made Buhari's 2015 victory possible. The same institutions, the same tactics, a completely different outcome than everyone predicted. This is not coincidence. This is a playbook, and someone is running it very deliberately. The northern APC governors, particularly those in the G5 bloc, watching whether the presidency can manage a southern political crisis. Their 2027 calculation depends partly on whether Tinubu can deliver political stability. Southeast governors monitoring carefully because a river state fracture reopens questions about South-South and Southeast political alignment that the PDP used to manage and APC has not yet resolved. Right. I need to pause here for just 1 second. Everything I have just broken down for you, the money, the legal ambiguity, the 2027 map, I did not get this from Twitter. This took days of reading assembly proceedings, tracking court filings, and cross-referencing budget documents. If this level of analysis is useful to you, then please hit subscribe right now. Not later, right now. Because the only way I can keep doing this work, the only way I can keep staying up until 2 a.m. going through documents that nobody else will read, is if you tell me it matters. Subscribe. Turn on notifications and stay with me because what I am about to show you next makes everything I just said even more significant. I told you earlier to hold the question of who benefits from this legal gray area. Here is the answer. It is not Fubara and it is not Wike. The actor most quietly advantaged by a prolonged river state constitutional crisis is the Tinubu Presidency itself. Because a crisis that requires presidential resolution gives Aso Rock leverage over both men simultaneously. A resolution forced by Abuja means both Fubara and Wike owe the presidency something. That is not an accident. That is statecraft. River State produces a significant share of Nigeria's crude oil output and hosts critical downstream infrastructure. Political instability at the governorship level creates an environment where security of oil infrastructure becomes unpredictable, which matters to IOCs with operational decisions pending. Investor confidence in the South-South. The crisis signals to domestic and foreign investors that federal-state political arrangements in Nigeria's oil region are unstable. This is relevant to the Dangote refinery's crude sourcing negotiations and to NNPCL's ongoing asset divestment program. River State has a documented history of political crisis translating into militant activity in the creeks. The 2015 to 2016 period following the Amaechi-Wike transition saw a resurgence of pipeline vandalism. A prolonged power vacuum in 2025 creates similar conditions. The DSS and military have standing protocols for River State due to its strategic importance. Any escalation above the current political level triggers those protocols, and who controls their deployment is directly connected to who has Aso Rock's ear. For someone in Rumuwola, Eleme, or Boni, the LGA elections that this crisis is ultimately about determine who controls the local government allocation, which determines whether the road outside your house gets graded, whether the primary health center gets drugs, and whether your ward's security arrangement is functional. For a Nigerian in Kano watching this is the story of what happens when a president's political ally in a state becomes a liability instead of an asset. If it can happen in Rivers, it can happen in any state where the governor and a federal-level patron are in conflict.
And this is where it gets international,
because what is unfolding in Rivers State right now is being watched from London, Washington, and the boardrooms of international oil companies that have billions of dollars of outstanding investment decisions tied to Nigeria's political stability. Here is why that matters. The UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office monitors Nigerian state-level political stability as part of its broader Nigeria country risk assessment, particularly in oil-producing states. Any deterioration in Rivers State security ratings affects UK development finance decisions and FCDO travel advisories, which in turn affect business confidence. U.S. State Department's Bureau of African Affairs has Nigeria as a Tier 1 monitoring priority. The 2027 election cycle is already in their assessment framework, and the Rivers State crisis will appear in their Nigeria Democratic Governance reporting as an early indicator. IOC investment decisions, Shell, TotalEnergies, and Equinor all have significant operational presence in Rivers State. Their HSE and political risk teams are tracking this crisis in real time. Any sustained violence or governance breakdown accelerates their divestment timeline and reduces NNPCC's negotiating leverage. Remittance flows into Rivers State. Nigerians in the diaspora sending money home to family in Port Harcourt, Aba, and Bonny need to understand that a governance crisis affects the local economy those remittances support. Inflation in basic goods, insecurity, and reduced LGA service delivery all increase the cost of living for the families you are supporting. Return migration consideration. Anyone considering returning to Nigeria for business or retirement needs to understand that political stability at the state level, not just federal, determines the operating environment. Rivers State has the infrastructure and economic base to be a serious destination for returnees, but not in a political crisis. This is not the first time a resource-rich subnational government has become the epicenter of a national political war. In Venezuela in 2002, the political conflict between Chavez and opposition governors in oil-producing states followed an almost identical pattern. Control of the subnational executive, manipulation of regional legislature, federal intervention framed as stabilization. The result in Venezuela was not stabilization, it was the permanent centralization of resource control in the federal executive. Nigeria is not Venezuela, but the institutional pressure points are recognizably similar, and the actors in Abuja are not unaware of that historical precedent. The strongest argument is this: Fubara is not a political genius executing a masterstroke. He is a politically inexperienced governor who stumbled into a confrontation with one of Nigeria's most experienced political operators, and his apparent victory so far is actually a function of Wike overplaying his hand, not Fubara playing brilliantly. Under this reading, Fubara is still vulnerable, his assembly moves are legally fragile, and the moment Tinubu decides to cash in the political debt Fubara owes him for survival, the governor will have no choice but to comply. This argument assumes that Tinubu has a clear and consistent position on Rivers State, but the evidence suggests he does not. The presidency's silence, the absence of a public directive from APC national leadership, and the continued coexistence of both Wike and Fubara within the same party structure suggest that Aso Rock does not yet have a preferred outcome. That ambiguity is Fubara's protection, not his vulnerability. The argument also underestimates the constitutional durability of a sitting governor. Under the Nigerian constitution, removing a sitting governor is an extraordinarily high bar. Short of a successful impeachment, a court-ordered removal, or a state of emergency, Fubara remains in office, and every week he remains in office, his political facts on the ground solidify.
3 most common misconceptions on social media. Misconception 1. This is just a Wike versus Fubara personal fight. No. This is a fight about who controls the delegate structure, local government machinery, and allocation pipeline of a 650 billion naira per year state entering an election cycle. The personal dimension is real, but it is not the story. Misconception 2. Tinubu will resolve this privately and it will blow over. The precedent does not support this.
The Nyesom-Wike conflict of 2013 to 2015 was predicted to resolve privately at least 4 times before it produced a full party split and a Supreme Court case. Political conflicts over this level of resource control do not resolve quietly. Misconception 3. This does not affect me if I am not from Rivers State. Incorrect. The South-South's political alignment in 2027 is directly connected to whether APC can win or remain competitive in a second-term bid. If Rivers fractures the party in the South-South, the electoral map changes for every Nigerian, regardless of region. I asked you at the start, what happens to APC's 2027 structure in the South-South if Fubara does not just survive but wins? Here's the answer. APC loses its most reliable southern anchor. Tinubu enters 2027 without a consolidated base in the South-South for the first time in his presidency. And the opposition, whether LP, PDP or a coalition we have not yet seen, gains its most structurally significant opening since 2023. Whether you are in the North or the South, whether you voted for this government or opposed it, what is happening in Rivers State right now is directly determining the shape of Nigeria's next presidential election. And now that you understand the full picture, what happens next? Because the most dangerous part of this story is not what has already occurred, it is what the next 3 moves are, and I am going to walk you through each one. Move 1. Aso Rock brokered resolution. Tinubu's team negotiates a formal truce that gives Fubara operational control of the state while giving Wike symbolic recognition as the elder statesman of Rivers APC. This is the most likely outcome in a 30 to 60-day window, but it is fragile because neither party trusts the other to honor it. Watch Signal. Both Fubara and Wike appear at the same APC event without a prior media conflict in the same week. Move 2. Legal escalation to Supreme Court. The assembly legitimacy question reaches the Supreme Court, which is asked to definitively rule on which faction constitutes the legitimate house. This delays everything by 12 to 18 months and freezes Rivers State politically through the most critical pre-election organization period. Watch Signal, a motion filed at the Supreme Court registry by either faction's lawyers. This will be reported in legal correspondence feeds before mainstream media. State of emergency declaration. This is the low-probability, high-consequence scenario. It requires Tinubu to get a 2/3 National Assembly majority. It is constitutionally available but politically costly. It would signal that Aso Rock has abandoned the brokered resolution approach. Watch Signal. Unusual security deployment in Port Harcourt, combined with a presidency statement that describes the Rivers crisis as a threat to constitutional order. APC National Secretariat's position on the Rivers Assembly factions. If they recognize one faction formally, the crisis enters a new phase. Wike's public statements on Rivers infrastructure projects. If he begins publicly attributing delays to Fubara, it signals the Abuja negotiation has broken down. LGA election timeline announcement from Rivers State Independent Electoral Commission. When they announce a date, both sides will escalate because LGA control is the ultimate prize. A security incident linked to political actors in Rivers State, either an attack on a political figure, an assembly building, or a symbolic institution that forces federal security intervention. This scenario accelerates every other timeline and removes the space for negotiation and potentially triggers the state of emergency option. Probability, low but non-zero, based on the documented pattern of violence that accompanied previous Rivers State political crises. And finally, a Supreme Court ruling that definitively resolves the assembly legitimacy question in a manner that both sides accept, combined with Fubara consolidating executive control and agreeing to a governance arrangement that gives Wike-aligned interests sufficient access to state infrastructure contracts to reduce their incentive to destabilize. This outcome requires judicial efficiency and political goodwill, which both are in short supply.
Civil society organizations in Rivers State document the constitutional violations systematically. An evidence record built now is the most valuable asset for accountability later, regardless of which actor ends up being held accountable. Voters across Nigeria understand that the 2027 presidential field is being shaped by what happens in Rivers State in the next 90 days. Engage that understanding in your conversations, your community, and your party affiliation decisions. Siminalayi Fubara has not yet won, but he has done something far more important than winning a single battle. He has made himself too expensive to remove without a cost that Tinubu is not currently willing to pay. That is not weakness. In Nigerian politics, that is the most sophisticated form of survival available to a governor who started this year as a political footnote. The move he made, whatever its specific form, was not reckless. It was calculated, and it has changed the geometry of APC's 2027 problem in a way that no press conference, no party resolution, and no Abuja dinner can easily undo. We do not yet know whether Tinubu will be asked to rule, and if so, how quickly. When that becomes clear, we will be back with a follow-up that maps the legal implications in detail. I want to hear from you, especially if you think I have missed something, overstated the Fubara advantage, or underestimated Wike's remaining capacity to reverse this. Drop it in the comments. This conversation is the whole point. If this analysis gave you something the evening news could not, I want to ask you something personal. I put hours into every single video on this channel, not because it is easy, because it matters, because Nigeria deserves analysis that is honest, that is deep, and that treats you as the intelligent, engaged person that you are. The only way I know this work is reaching people who need it is when you subscribe, when you share it, and when you show up for the next one. So, if this video moved something in you, share it with one Nigerian who needs to understand what is really happening in this country. Like this video, subscribe to Niger Insider Report, turn on notifications so you are here when the next chapter of this story breaks. I will see you in the next one, and trust me, what we are covering next is something that will make today's video look like the introduction.